Hello everyone, welcome to another live hangout here at Voice Essentials. Happy Halloween to those of you in the Northern Hemisphere, and happy All Saints Day to those of you who are already in your Monday in the Southern Hemisphere. Today is the 1st of November here in Australia, which means some of you are still in your 31st of October. But wherever you are in the world, I hope you're safe, happy, and in good voice. Today, I have a very special guest. She's special because she's a personal friend and someone who I really respect, and someone who I have shared the odd glass of wine here and there at different conferences with, and we've presented together a number of times. Dr. Belinda McMahon is going to be joining us. I'm going to ask Belinda in a moment how to correctly pronounce her last name because I'm certain I'm always getting it wrong. Anyway, Belinda will tell us about that in a moment. We're going to be talking about such an important topic today. This is a topic that I think every singer needs to engage with, and thus today's video is a video you absolutely are going to want to watch because we're talking about vocal identity. And more than just talking about it, today we've got an expert on the show in Dr. Belinda who has actually done her research into vocal identity, and she's going to tell us more about that in a moment. But looking forward to hanging out. We won't do any, too much further ado today. I think we're going to get straight into it because, as I said, today's show is going to be super interesting. I'll see you on the other side of this.
Sound check. Check 1, check 2.
Oh, I suddenly choked up at the end there. Hello, Dr. Belinda McMahon. Help me.
McMahon.
McMahon. It's so simple. Why do I say McMahon?
Well, it's McMahon in Australia. Americans will be McMahon.
McMahon. That's
the same way, but they'll be more likely to say McMahon. We say McMahon.
McMahon. See, this is probably where I've gotten all twisted up. Anyway, McMahon. So simple. So, and of course, I had been introducing you with the hyphenated in the lead up to doing our shows today. And advertising, yes. Letting everyone know that you're going to come on, telling everyone about the hyphenated lemon, which you and I have always had a bit of a running gag
that's right.
From the 30 Rock show.
Well, that's right. Lemon's the maiden name, and then it became a hyphenated name, and then after a while it was just so long to type. I'm like, I'm just making it simple.
Get rid of it.
That's right.
I'll
always be lemon to you.
You lemon. I am so happy to have you on the show today, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion. But before we do, despite the fact that I know you, so many of our viewers today, our audience, and the community here at Voice Essentials, so many of them don't know you. So I wonder if you might just take a brief moment to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about, because you've got a performance history, you've got a teaching history, you've got a researching, you are the whole package. Tell us a bit more about Belinda McMahon.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, absolutely. You're right. A big teaching history. Started teaching scarily, over 2 decades ago now. So, a lot of teaching in which I deal with students of all different ages, from very young right through to retired adults of all different styles. Though nowadays most of my focus is definitely in contemporary and musical theatre genres. I used to perform. I say used to. I still do the occasional gig here and there nowadays. But I was a professional performer for, over a decade, where I did a variety of stuff, but I definitely found my niche in cabaret. And so, yeah, cabaret was that turned into my niche. I think I liked the engagement, the interaction with people, the variety in repertoire, which was good fun. And I found within cabaret, I found myself in a bit of a niche of doing a Bette Midler show for many years. For over 5 years, I was the divine Miss M.
You would do a great, Miss M, wouldn't you?
I actually loved doing it. It was so much fun. Like I'm sure a lot of performers will understand, the way I got into it originally was just people saying to me all the time on stage, "You look like Bette Midler. You look like Bette Midler." And this was back when I was in my early 20s. So, couple of days ago, and it was just always, you look like Bette Midler. I think especially when you're on stage and you have the eyelashes on and the hair all done up and everything, and then it sort of hit me. I thought, well, why don't I actually look into her? And I went from being this person that really knew Bette Midler very much from, say, her Wind Beneath My Wings era onwards, because I was a teenager when Beaches came out and you were there. Then I researched her earlier stuff, and you just fall in love with her. Who can't? Her repertoire, especially her earlier repertoire, is so fun and so great. So great to sing, so great to perform, and the comedy, which I had never done much comedy before, but then going into the comedy side of it, I had a ball with it, and I was really lucky. I managed to do that show for over 5 years. Around Australia and on cruise ships and in lots of festivals and clubs and cabaret venues. So from spaces as small as 20 people to venues as outdoor performances as large as 20,000. So a big array. So that was my performance experiencing. And throughout that time, I was a beginner, I guess, early career singing teacher with lots of wonderful guidance coming through from, say, my teacher and other mentors in the industry. And then when it came time, when I chose to stop performing, I made this shift then over into research. So the teaching's been a staple the whole way through. And then I sort of found myself in a position doing some casual work within a university. And it was at that point that research was mentioned to me as a possibility. And so I delved into that and haven't looked back. Absolutely love it. Absolutely loved it, as I'm sure when you did too. The voice is an incredible instrument, and as I say to my students, singing and the creation of sound is science, but actually singing and performing it is an art form. And so to me, singing and the voice is this wonderful mixture of science and art, all coming together in this amazing way, in a way that is unique for every single individual and every single person who does it. It's magical. It's
interesting you say. I've actually, before we came on today, I've been editing a new video which will go live in the new year about how the singing voice works, and I make the comment at the very beginning of the video that, well, it's more an observation that this singing thing is so, it's wonderfully rewarding to do. We all, that's why we've got this show and why you and I teach it and why other people learn it and do it. But it is incredibly complex because it is science meets art. And it's also, the psyche meets body. There's so much to this thing we call singing, and I think as a result, it can form a real, at times, a real barrier to people engaging with it, and because we bring everything about ourselves to this singing thing. There's not, we don't rock up at our favorite music store and, pick an instrument and go, oh, I'll have that and start playing it. We are the instrument. And I know your research is in this field of vocal identity. I'm really excited to hear what your research showed us, because there must be something in the water at the moment around vocal identity, because I've seen Chris Johnson. He's from the Naked Vocalist. He's been on the show before. He's been making comments around it online, and there's been a whole heap of discussion from pedagogues about it. Last week we had a member in our Voice Essentials community really being wonderfully vulnerable and truthful and authentic in their expression around their struggles around their vocal identity. So I think this is going to be a really, really positive discussion for many people. I wonder if you can kick us off by firstly telling us how it is that you came to starting the research, and then maybe lead us into what you found.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I agree. It is so relevant and it is so important to all of us. And it was through my teaching, and after that performance history that I just, explained to you, where I did take on other performers. I did take on the persona, say, of Bette Midler. And as a training singer, I'd always been taught that being able to do whatever I was asked to do was literally the gold standard. That's what you need to be able to do to get work, to take all of this on. And I was also a very well-trained singer. I had studied from a young age. So technique was very strong, but it was singing exams, all of these experiences, I guess, that were shaping my voice and shaping who I was as a performer, but never with any thought about it. I was never consciously thinking about any of that stuff. And then as a teacher, I started looking at students. It was often students, often in, say, their early 20s sort of age. And I was looking at them and sometimes going, why does somebody have such a great sense of who they are? And you can see it coming through in their voice, in their performances. They really know who they are. And other people were struggling to find that. Other people didn't have that clear sense yet. It made me start wondering, I wonder why. And I started to have questions too, like, would I sound the same if I'd learned from a different teacher? Would I sound the same if I had different experiences? Would my trajectory of where I ended up being a professional performer or going down this path, would that have been different if I'd had all these different experiences? I mean, it makes sense to us that probably it would be different, but how different? What would have been different? And so I guess I just had all of these questions coming at me, and I was really fascinated. And as a teacher, I wanted to be able to understand these things so that I could help my students better. So this is what led me down the path of deciding I really wanted to see about vocal identity. And interestingly, at the very, very beginning, when I started, how research works, you start with an idea and then it morphs over time. At the very beginning, I was very, very teacher focused. I wanted to actually really see how much does the teacher, how much does the pedagogue influence. But as I did more reading and more learning myself, I could see how limited that was and that was going to be. So in the end, it ended up being a very broad study. So the research was looking for people who identified as singers. So I think that's important to state from the beginning. The very first stage of research was an online questionnaire, an online survey, and it did ask for singers. But so they had to identify as a singer. But other than that, they just had to be over 18. They could be trained or untrained, and they could be professional or amateur. Yeah. So anyone who identified as a singer in any of those areas, and really it was looking to capture the broad range of information, to actually capture what were these influences and influencers on their development to create their vocal identity. And I guess in short, and we'll go into more detail, but in short, it really came through that vocal identity is the oral representation of who you are as a person. Okay, and that is in every way. I went into it as a well-trained singer and as a singing teacher myself. I went into it thinking that vocal technique and my training was going to be, and for everyone, that was going to be such a crucial part as to why they sound the way they sound right now. And in actual fact, they were really low down the list.
Wow.
They were. I'm not saying they don't influence and impact. They do. But there are so many other things so many other contributing factors into the development of our sound, so much of which is actually happening well below the level of real awareness and consciousness that shape the sound and the choices we end up making. So I would say the singing, whilst technique is obviously a factor there, it's often coming in later on down the track. It's like a secondary factor.
Yeah. Is it a bit like, you know, when a student steps into our studio, it's a bit like an artisan taking, say they're a wood craftsman, and they're taking the piece of wood that they have. No one gets to dictate what that piece of wood is. They've got to work with the wood that they take on, and they craft that piece of wood in accordance with what that piece of wood will and won't do. Is it a bit like that?
Yeah, I guess absolutely. That's a great analogy. It's, you know, we have got certain elements of our sound that come from our morphology. So in terms of how we are built, there are things, the size and shape of our vocal folds, the vocal tract, length, there are, you know, our resonance cavities. Those are the components that are fixed, okay? So they're the bits that make us us and make our voice us. However, as we know, and we really know this as voice teachers, that we can actually change so much of that. Number one, we can choose to change those things. So we can choose to use our resonance spaces differently, or we can choose to use our vocal tract in a different way to impact the resonance. You know, there's so many different things we can change. We see this in singers, we see this in vocal impersonators, be it either singing or spoken impersonators, that there's a lot of ability to change. We also see it through growth in our lifetime. So, and vocal health factors as well, that these can actually impact us and change our sound. So there are some set things, but then there is everything else. Now, when we came to influencers and influencers, the significant influencers and influencers that really are shaping us are all our life experiences. So that may mean our experiences through learning, formal or informal learning. So that could be structured singing lessons, but it also could be a choir experience. It could just be the music we're exposed to in a classroom setting or a school setting, or the way we're encouraged to use our voice. It can be, let's see, it can be like community theatre. Community theatre was a huge example of where people are being influenced, and community choirs, churches and other places of worship, in the way that they use their voice and engage with their voice there and their musical style. Family is massive. Okay, the family experiences are massive. Now, that's in a real practical sense in terms of, you know, providing for lessons and driving children around, but also the music that's being played on car trips, the music that's being played in the home, the way the parents use their voices, or if they don't use their voice, if they don't engage with singing, and how it's being used. And so all of these experiences impacted singers, and they impact their vocal sound because of numerous reasons. One is because of what they're listening to. Okay, so the sounds we're listening to are often the sounds that we'll end up starting to copy or emulate. Not always intentionally. Sometimes it will be intentionally, but a lot of the times it's not intentional. So we've got this idea of imitation that comes through, either intentionally or unintentional imitation that happens. It impacts our style of music that we listen to, the style of music that we have a good relationship to. So if it's if this music brings back really happy childhood memories for us, even if it's in our formative years that we even can't remember, we're still going to have that emotional response to it. And the other key factor is that so many of these environments, home, community singing settings, churches, they normalise singing. So especially, you know, in some cultures where singing is not necessarily a normal activity, these places normalise singing, and by normalising singing, take away some of the judgment that can be happening with singing. Okay, so it can take away this feeling of talent. You would know that talking about singer, non-singer idea.
Yes.
You know how there's that singer, non-singer
Yes.
dichotomy or conversation that happens.
Yes.
If singing has been normalized either in the home or in your community setting or somewhere or in your cultural environment, then this am I a singer or am I not a singer conversation is taken away. Now, if we take that conversation out of somebody's mind and out of somebody's life, then this singer is more likely to engage in singing. They're more likely to feel validated. They're more likely to have confidence. From there, they're more likely to learn. And as we know, be it in formal or informal settings, they're likely to learn, they're likely to engage. And from that learning and from that engagement, their singing sound, their voice develops and their sound is impacted.
Wow.
So it's this multi-stage process that what somebody has said to us when we are 5 or 6 or 10 or 15, may cause us to have confidence and feel validated, which then may lead on to engagement. It may have been that somebody said, you sing that song really well, that style really suits you. Gee, you've got great high notes. Or, and from there, that starts to shape our beliefs. It shapes our belief systems about the voice we have. As a result, our training and experiences start to maybe focus around that. Before we know it, 10 years later, that is actually embedded, or 5 years later, it's embedded into our sound because of the words that somebody has said back, over here in these earlier days of our lives. So basically, the research showed, again, and I guess this is a massive summary, but it is all life experiences, all learning experiences, and all of these life experiences in the home, in the family, in the community, in our social environment, all of them actually impact and shape our eventual sound and the way we use our voice. But it's not just the experiences, it's the emotional response of the singer to those experiences. And that is what we're hearing in somebody's voice.
Before we talk about, how we, what we've kind of just talked about is how we arrive at our vocal identity. I want to talk how do we habitate that vocal identity in a moment. But before we do, I've got a personal question of interest. How does epigenetics play into it in any way? Like, do we, were you able to delve into that in any way with the research to sort of understand, the lineage genetically for people, even, pre-birth, so that imprint, that DNA imprint that is embedded, beyond our great grandparents?
I know it's actually such a fascinating area, and I love it, and epigenetics, but also just how that actually, what is expressed in our genes, which gene, the expression, that whole process.
Yeah. I
will say that was really beyond the scope of just this one research.
Yes, I thought it might be.
It is, unfortunately, but my God, is it an area for further research? It's a massive area for further research. However, in terms of that, family influence was most certainly relevant. Okay, so in terms of it was definitely found to be generational. So, a love of music and an engagement of singing was definitely passed down through the generations. What obviously is still up for debate is how much of that may be because of an ability and how much of that is because of what is expressed because of what you're surrounded by. However, there was definitely a finding within the singers that they felt that their ability to sing was innate. Okay, they felt like they had just been born with it, and that it was just something they could always do. However, when we combine it with the literature and other research that's been done to do with musicians, like musicians' identity, it it appears that this idea that it's innate is a little bit of a misperception that a lot of us hold. Okay, and that the really early young life experiences are completely under-recognized by most of us in what's gone on in our life. Probably under-recognized reasonably because we don't remember them. You know, and as you said, from before we're even born, I mean, we know that babies are born with a predisposition to, say, liking the music, the same music that the mother likes. Because of the emotional reaction of the mother when she's listening to music, the baby becomes aware of that and senses that through, you know, emotional reactions are actually a chemical reaction in our body. So, or a reaction in our body in various different complicated ways. But so the baby is born with that predisposition. And then it's in those really early, infancy years that we're becoming, climatized, or we're starting to favor things like consonance over dissonance and a regular beat. So those things are already happening. We're obviously already starting to favor the voices of our parents from before we are born because we know them. And then when we favor a voice, we're favoring a vocal tone. Yeah. You know, we're favoring a sound, a warmth, or a particular tonal quality that we're favoring. And so whilst we sort of believe that it's innate and we're born with this ability, and obviously, as we've just stated, there are certain elements that we are born with. Okay, there are definitely certain elements that we're born with. There is so much that is actually brought into our lives through our really early life experiences. Did our parents sing to us? Was there music in the household all the time? Did our mother, when she was pregnant, find joy in listening to a particular style of music? These are all the things that are shaping us on a level that we're not really aware of. Then if we, and then if we combine that with everything that we now know about neuroplasticity and the brain and how the brain develops, and that all of these emotional responses to situations, actually our emotional response actually becomes wired into our brain. Just as much as the action of making the sound, the emotional response to something becomes wired in as well. So I don't know if that sort of answers the question there. That I think, unfortunately, one thesis can't unfortunately
you didn't solve world peace with your thesis?
Nearly, but not quite.
But not quite. So close, but no cigar. I wonder. We talk about brain plasticity, and when I think of brain plasticity, and then I think about the imprint of certain attributes that you've just been describing to us. I wonder to what degree. And I often think about ironing. I do the majority of the ironing in my house, mostly because I'm the one with the shirts that need ironing. And when you get a piece of fabric that has a crush that's embedded into it, like it's the fabric, the memory of that fabric is such that no matter how much ironing you might do to that piece of fabric, that embedded crush is always going to be there, even if it's only, you can iron it out, but you can still see the imprint of that crush. I wonder, in the crease lines and what have you, to what extent can we fully iron out those imprints in our voice?
I think that's a really fabulous question, and probably one that is probably always asking, how long's a piece of string? I don't know if we'll ever actually get a very set answer for this, but we do know that our brains are plastic. We obviously know that now, that our brains are plastic, but we know that they're more plastic, so able to change more so in our earlier years. So some of these creases, like you're talking about, are potentially being, put in that fabric before we're even old enough to know that crease has been there. So when we come to later on in our lives, it's like we're going to continue to follow a particular path because it's the path we've always done. Okay, so we have decided somewhere in our lifetime, we've decided, say, that we can't sing high notes, and that if we do try to sing them, it's really strained, it's really tight, it just is not comfortable in our voice. I'm just going to use that as an example because I certainly know as a singing teacher, I see that a lot, and I'm sure you are probably going to see that as well. Now, that has sometimes happened because maybe at some point in their life, because of growth and just the developmental stage the voice was at, maybe that was a difficult range to hit, and they've tried to hit it. Maybe they've been, forced to try and sing too high in a choir at some point when they've been younger, and as a result, they've developed this reaction to it, and then they've started to push it out. So they've created this tightness. As we know, that becomes habitual. But a habit in the voice, just like a habit in any part of the body, becomes wired into the brain. And that's what you're talking about, is that crease in that fabric.
Yeah.
So, as we know, neurons that fire together wire together in the brain. So we've then fired these neurons together enough to say high notes are going to be really tight. That's how we're going to sing our high notes, with this tension, and that's how we're singing them. We've done that enough that becomes the habitual way. The brain gets very, very used to doing that, and that action has power and has control in our brain. So when we want to retrain that, is it possible? Yes, it is. It is possible. But we actually not only need to reduce this connection, the control of this connection, we need to establish a new pathway through the brain to sing in a different way. And that is what takes time. They refer to it as the plastic paradox. Okay, and when I say they, I'm pretty sure the author I'm citing that right there is Norman Doidge, but it is the plastic paradox, in that the brain is plastic, but unfortunately, because it's plastic, we can wire things in that we don't actually want to wire in sometimes, and then they become part of it. So I always say to my students, practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. So whatever we're going to keep practicing is what we're actually going to wire in. So yeah, that's where that crease comes. Can we change it? Yes, we can. But felt like I was Bob the Builder then for a second. Can we fix it? Yes, we can. That's right. Flashbacks from my children's earlier days. But we can change it.
We're both showing our age now, Belinda, because I don't think Bob the Builder is a thing anymore.
I believe it is.
Is he?
Somebody told me, but they've changed the song now. He doesn't fix it, he builds it or something now.
Oh.
Anyway, that's a complete tangent. We'll save that for another day. But yeah, we can, but it takes time. So we need to first of all focus on figuring out, this is what I find anyway, figuring out why has this connection started. The first one, isn't it? With all learning, awareness is step one. So where has this come from? I had a student once that I was speaking to. She had an exceptionally tight lower register and an exceptionally light and breathy upper register. Completely contrasting. No way of really being able to bring them together in any way, but that's what she wanted to do. I wasn't there to change her voice, but that's what she wanted, to be able to draw them together more, but they were so contrasting. And after working with her for a while, I asked her to describe what she thinks a lower register, or chest voice, or whatever term you want to use. How would she describe that sound? How does she think a chest voice should sound? And she described exactly the way she uses her voice. And then I was like, oh, what do you think a head voice should sound like? And she described exactly, it's going to be really light and quite breathy and really light, and she thought in a chest voice is going to be powerful and a bit punchy and a bit squeezed, and I think, they were roughly the words she was using. And that was exactly what I was hearing. So somewhere along her journey of life, somewhere, either through what somebody said, either through what she's heard, through what she's experienced, somewhere along the line, she has created this belief in herself that these are what these different registers sound like. As a result, because it's been her thought process, the brain then, she starts making that sound. We have to remember, the voice can only do what the brain or the mind tells it to do. That's all it can do. And so it is therefore representing what she is thinking. And over time, that has become habitualized. As you say, that crease has become ironed in. She has created these pathways in her brain that when she goes to sing in one register, it goes one particular way, and she's going to sing in a different register, she's going to use her voice differently. That's been solidified in through the connections in her brain. So then it's a process of unraveling that. Recognition, starting to change some of the thought processes, and then working on changing your habits, which is where small amounts regularly are going to be more effective than long irregular practices. It's about understanding that every time you sing in the old way that you don't want to sing in anymore, you're going to be just continually to reinforce that. And we want to instead actually start reinforcing the new one. It's also about enjoyment. There is research to say that to rewire the brain, the more fun you're having with it, the more likely you are going to actually be successful at rewiring. And it also sleep and general health. The healthier you are, you're sleeping, if your body's well fueled, the healthier your brain is, the more likely you're going to be able to rewire it.
Wow. As I'm talking, as we're talking, I'm thinking that kind of, we could sort of umbrella the chapter of our discussion as being the technical attributes of the voice, the way the voice operates. And I'm thinking back to I mentioned earlier in the show that we had a person in our Voice Essentials community who shared that they were struggling to, in their identity as a singer, and in the formation of their voice, and there was certainly a technical attribute to that. I wonder whether we might have a brief opportunity to talk about that psyche identity, that sense of singer, non-singer, and I often say to students, that we were sold a lie back in the 80s and the 90s, and that was that whatever you want to be, you can be anything you want to be. And in the sense that, well, that immediately has so many exceptions and limitations to a point of it being an untruth. There are a whole heap of things that I'd love to be a pilot, but the reality is I couldn't be because my middle ear won't let me. Like it just I could that so instantaneously I can't be a pilot, right? And so this sense of identity around becoming the singer that you perceive yourself as wanting to be. Did you do any investigation in that area?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's in terms of knowing, I guess it's understanding what your voice can do and can be, and trying to switch off the sounds or the voices of other people and what other people are putting on you. So what was really interesting in the research was that singers could not describe their own sound. The majority of singers could not describe their own sound. So some singers could, but mostly they didn't know what words to use to describe sound or even how to think about it. And then depending on their training or their style of singing, the best they could maybe get would be, I'm a classical soprano, or I'm a tenor, or I'm a musical theatre, soprano or mezzo.
They almost sound like external labels that have been applied from external.
Absolutely, they are. That's right. So there was this labelling system that people could use, and I think that's because that's what other people have put on them.
Yeah.
How many singers have come to you and say, I'd like to know whether I'm a soprano or an alto, or and sometimes these are 13-year-olds asking me. I go, well, we'll find out.
We don't know yet.
That's right, exactly. And there's a lot of labelling, as there is in society for so many things. Yeah. So what what this labeling does to all of us, though, is it starts to put limitations on us. Because one thing that really, really showed through was that validation and confidence were very, very significant. They were very significant influences, but they also were very, very fragile. So it didn't take much for somebody's confidence or to be impacted, or for them to not feel validated, to have a negative experience that really turned them off. Now, what those things do is that those things then create a label on that person. So like that person then takes that on. As I said, it could be that somebody has told them, when you can't sing high, or, you know, or why do you sing so loud, or why are you so shouty, or, you know, or why is your voice so breathy in this area, or, you know, these judgment comments that other people will say, because our voice is so much a part of our identity, because it is such an integral part of ourselves. It is our method of communication. It is our way of expressing ourselves. And as we know, it is deeply connected to our sense of identity as a person, not just our vocal identity. Our voice is deeply connected to who we are. So when somebody says to us, you know, makes some sort of judgment call, even if it's a passing comment, we really take that quite personally. It really is quite significant to us. I mean, I'm sure, as you know, it sometimes puts us as singing teachers in a really awkward position between somebody wants help with their voice, but it can be sometimes, you know, it's that fine balance between helping someone find their voice, but not feeling like we're accidentally manipulating them or pushing them in some direction, and how they're going to respond to that. And so if we go back to this psyche and to this person that you were talking about there, that is sort of having trouble finding that, what I think is a great thing for singers to do is to stop and reflect on what have been the experiences throughout their life that have either made them feel good, maybe they've made them feel bad, maybe they have created particular beliefs about their voice or their singing ability or the sound they make. And maybe it was a passing comment when they were very young, or maybe it was something very significant. It can be things like whether or not you get given a role in a musical or not, or the type of role that you continually get given. Or if you're singing in a choir or another singing group, the type of solo you're continually given or not given. So because somebody else perceives you as being good in this type of role, then that actually comes on and starts to become part of your psyche. It starts to become part of who you are and part of the way you use your voice. Now, maybe that worked for us when we were 15 or 16 or 20 or whatever, but maybe that doesn't work for us anymore when we're then, you know, 5 years on from that, or even older from that, and, you know, and as you're an adult and trying to find your own sound. And so I think there is a lot of sometimes needing to let go of what other people have said to us. What have they said? How has it shaped us? What experiences have we had that have made us use our voice differently? When I was, you know, younger, I'm always a loud person. You know me, Dan, I'm loud, you know. I'm a loud person. You'll hear me at the party. You'll hear me on the other side of the room.
Everyone, that is true.
It's me. It's who I am. And after a while, though, everyone keeps saying, "Oh, you're loud," and sometimes it starts to become a negative thing. And I remember there became a time in my early 20s where I felt like I needed to pull back. I needed to stop being that person. I needed to start using my voice differently. I needed to be quieter. What did I do? I became quieter in certain environments, but by bringing intention into my voice, because that's often what we do when we become a bit quieter. And I wasn't using my natural sound. I wasn't being me. I wasn't expressing who I was anymore. And as a result, that actually led to some vocal health issues. And I ended up with a speech pathologist, because it was only in my spoken voice, not my singing voice. And I ended up with a speech pathologist who said, well, just be you. You need to use your voice the way you use your voice. Obviously, mindful voice use, i.e., not screaming at a party and trashing my voice. I'm not talking about that. But I'm meaning that I felt like I had to conform, that I had to fit into this box of what I was meant to be in an environment. Now, I ask everyone to think, as a singer, how many boxes have we been put into? You know, you're an alto now, and you've got to be the alto, or you're a soloist, or worse still, no, you're not the soloist. You know, that may have been when we were 12 or 13, or maybe when we were 16, but we're still carrying that with us.
Yeah.
And so as a result, when we try and let go to let our voice out, to let our voice be, we've got to let go of all this baggage, all these voices in our head to be able to do it. I often think now, and I didn't necessarily think this, as a singing teacher 20 years ago, it wasn't necessarily the way I thought. Now, I think my primary job as a singing teacher is often to help students release tension. Now, that may be physical tension in the voice, but often I'm talking about the mental tension.
Yeah.
It's this mental clutter that's going on. It's these judgments that are in our head. Our society doesn't help that we have such this singer, non-singer argument going on all the time. And we label somebody as a singer sometimes in their early years of primary school.
Yes.
Before they've had an opportunity to be exposed, before they've had an opportunity to actually develop their ability. Now, I believe this is actually going back to the conversation we had before about innate ability.
Yeah.
Around year 4, year 5, bear with me on that, I'd have to look it up. Year 4, year 5, like that 9, 10 sort of age, apparently our mindset changes from believing that abilities are flexible, that we can learn anything, that our abilities are not set. But around that age, we actually shift to believing that our abilities, are fixed. We either say we can do this or we can't do it. It's something that we've already, that's sort of within us. So to me, that when you combine that with the research I had that people believe that singing ability is innate, potentially a misperception. Other research shows that that's probably a misperception, that it's innate. But if we believe singing is innate, and then if by 9 or 10 we shift to this mindset, this belief that our abilities are fixed, but mostly we haven't actually started singing training before that age.
No. And
we may have had very limited musical experiences depending on our family and our community and culture and the settings we've been in. So we might have had very limited experiences. So we can see that this belief of singing being innate has massive, far-reaching consequences to singers all over the place. And so I really urge everybody to stop and reflect, and from that reflection, journal, write things down.
Yeah.
Then from there, go to listening. Record themselves, listen, start to hear what they're hearing and what reaction do they have to that sound. Stop and reflect on the reaction they're having, and what does it make them think of? What experiences or memories does it bring up for them?
Yeah.
As all of this is starting to be unraveled, so is the voice. So is the voice that it's meant to be. And maybe some of those deep creases that are in the material are starting to, they're starting to be ironed out. They're starting to lessen, and the singer starts to maybe have more choices. And maybe that's where we can start to tap into, what is this voice actually really meant to be? Who is this person? And what voice do they have?
At the risk, and we're going to have to finish up in a sec. At the risk of being, of us being accused as being idealist, I want to play the devil's advocate for a moment, in the sense that I want to explore, I want to put on a realist hat for a moment, and I like to think of myself as a critical realist, and that is, there are people who set out in their mind that they want to become a professional singer, and so they go about starting to learn, develop their technique. They tick all the right boxes, but for whatever reason, and there could be a variety of them, they don't seem to be landing that professional opportunity. And that is wrapped up in their vocal identity. They start to, there is a search for significance in the sense that they're looking to achieve a professional outcome, and yet that professional outcome, let's say it never happens. And I'm asking you, to put it up in a nice little box and put a bow on it for us for the finish of the show. But what's wrapped up in that? How does a person work through that challenge?
So the challenge of, I guess, not receiving that validation that they were looking for by trying to get that professional work. That's the question, I guess. Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's a real thing, isn't it? It happens.
It's a massive.
It's one thing for you and I to sit here and say, everyone's a singer, and we wholeheartedly believe that. But yet the reality of life is not every athlete goes to the Olympics.
Exactly. I actually use that analogy a bit as well about the whole athlete and going to the Olympics idea. Look, I think, and maybe, this is easier for someone, in my 40s who had a career, was able to say, but I think sometimes we need to be true to ourselves. And, if we try and be a different singer to get the job, so we're trying to be a different singer to get a particular job, or we put all of that stress on ourselves, we're unlikely to actually really demonstrate ourselves in our best light or in our best way. And that maybe, there is so much joy and enjoyment that can come from singing without it being tied to financial gain, or without it being tied to a job or to being a profession. And that, I'm actually a real optimist. I'm a real optimist. It's just how I am. So I think I would always like to say to people that if you've got a goal, if there's something you want to achieve, you should keep working for it and you should keep striving for it. But I do think the best way to do that is to be true to yourself and to try and find that truth within yourself and within your own voice. And if that isn't what somebody else is looking for, if that isn't what somebody is wanting to pay for in that time, well, then maybe that is just the way our path is meant to be at that moment in time. And I know that sounds horribly, I guess it sounds horribly unhelpful, doesn't it? But in the way that it's all a little bit, maybe a little bit idealist, and it's about trying to find it. But I guess it's about trusting the process, and that we can't force things, we can't make things. If somebody is trying their hardest, they're working hard, they're doing everything they need to do, and it's not happening right now, then maybe that's just not the path they're meant to be on right in this moment in time, and maybe they've got something greater to give in another area, or maybe it'll be later on down the track. Maybe they just haven't found their niche as yet. They're trying to put themselves into a box that isn't the path for them as yet. And I think that's where you actually need to stay open-minded and see where you go, because maybe, I actually love teaching far more than I love performing. But if you'd asked my 20-year-old self, a performer was all I wanted to be. And I didn't want to go to university. I didn't want a bar of it. And now look at me. I have a PhD. I ended up doing a PhD and went somewhere different. So maybe we need to trust that process and just try and find that truth in our voice, and that we can find so much joy in a different way in our voice.
You and I are the same, bar the fact that you didn't want to do research. I always wanted to get the doctorate, but I too, in my 20s, I considered myself primarily a performer, and probably at that age I was. But now I far more enjoy my teaching than I do, and so our path does take us along different directions. And the comment you just made, which is exactly the comment that I made within the Voice Essentials community Facebook page for this person, was it's process over product, and I wonder too whether in this, not this just this particular instance, but in this sort of scenario, whether we need to do what you were encouraging earlier, and that is reflect on what has brought about the sense of validation being found in being a professional singer. Is there a reason that's pushing us or directing us down that's bedded further down the track? It's fascinating, isn't it? Because it's such a, and I've asked you to unpack a doctorate in 50 minutes flat. You've done very well, it has to be said. But it is a big topic, and I think we all do well. We all can grow from that sense of self-reflection and at times sitting honestly with ourselves and allowing others to speak honestly into our lives. We have to be careful there, being sure that they are trusted, authentic voices, not voices with their own agendas.
That's right. And unfortunately, the nature of the industry, we have directors, we have musical directors, we have so many other people coming at us with their own voices, and so this is where it can be hard to find it. And I think the earlier and the younger we can start thinking about vocal identity and trying to find it within ourselves, the better off hopefully people will be as they go through that journey where so many different voices are placed on them and different words in their heads.
Yeah. Belinda, thanks for hanging out. It's been a lot of fun.
It's been my pleasure.
The only thing missing from our usual chats was a glass of vino.
I promise it's just water in here.
Yeah, sure it is. It's been so good to have you on the show. And I know that people will have got a lot out of this. Can I encourage everyone that's been watching the show today, this is a repeat. This is a show you're going to want to replay because there's so much important wisdom born out of research and experience, Belinda's experience, that I think we can all gain from. Really, how you read those books where there are some books where you just read it once, you skate through, and that's lovely. And then there are those books where you read a chapter and you've got to, or even a paragraph, and you've got to walk away and give it some time to really. I think today's video is one of those, and so I want to encourage you to re-watch the video, share the video with as many people as people who are right now considering themselves as singers and identifying as such, and who are really exploring their vocal identity. I want you to encourage you to share the show with them. Belinda, thanks for hanging out. It's been a lot of fun, and do you have any closing words of wisdom?
Look, my little favorite saying now is that our voice is a snapshot of who we are. And I think that is important to remember as we move forward and as we use our voices. It's important to remember as singers, so important to remember as teachers when we're dealing with people. And it's just, your voice is an expression of everything that you've experienced, and it will continue to change and it will continue to grow as you do. And the more we can love that process and embrace that process and enjoy exploring everything that we've gone through. And as I said, trying not to let negative experiences impact us in a negative way, being aware that they can, then, I just think our voices can then really, really help express ourselves the way we want to express ourselves. And we don't need to be put in boxes that we may have felt we've been put into.
Can you say it any better than that, everyone? What a great show. I've just looked down at the time. We've gone a little bit over today. I hope that's been okay with everyone, because Belinda had so much to give us, and I do encourage you to rewatch the show and really, really dig deep into the self-reflection that has been encouraged today. We're going to hang out again next week, as we do every Monday, Australian Eastern Standard Time at 1 p.m. Next week is a Q&A where we're going to answer your questions. So make sure you come ready to ask your questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. The week after that, we've got Professor Brian Gill on the show again. He's a friend of mine and of us as a community. So Brian will be joining us for he'll be our last guest for 2021, and then our last show will be the week following. So I hope you're going to be able to join us when we hang out then. So don't forget to subscribe, hit the white bell icon. That way you're going to make sure that you're notified of every new live show when we go live, and it'll be good to hang out every Monday, 1 p.m. Have a great week, everyone. Happy Halloween to those of you who are still in the midst of the 31st of October.